see different today. Transformed in a way that just better glorifies you. So, Father, we just lift up our family who are here today. We pray that they're all in good health and good spirits. We just wish them well. Pray you keep them safe. We just thank you again for all that you do for us, for what you did, and for what you take away. Thank you for your love and mercy and your grace, Father. In your Son, Yeshua. Amen.
All right. So, last week we've kind of started on, when we started on it before, and I'll be honest with you, I tend to wrestle with direction because in trying to know, but at the same time, the problem with making these discoveries and reading this thing out is you have to deal with what you discovered. And I'll tell you a Heinz story. I've got a young guy working for me. His name's Max. And Max has a history. He was adopted from Ukraine when he was 11 years old, come to the United States. Prior to that, his parents were alcoholics and drug addicts. And so he had a grandpa that was kind of he said he was the one that loved him. He could tell. But the parents, AJ, were strung out. And if you've seen pictures of Ukraine, it doesn't look like a tropical paradise to me. It looks cold. And he told me stories about how, imagine being a kid, 10, 11, younger, and your parents, you didn't know what you was going to eat, you didn't know what your life was going to be like, and you didn't have sheets, you didn't have a bed, AJ, you slept on the floor. Imagine being raised in that environment. It's so funny because I remember when, since she's not in here, I can say this, Bailey she decided she was going to be emo. And of course, I'm a redneck. What do I know about an emo? And I said, well, what does that mean? And she says, well, it means that I'm emotional. And I was like, well, what do you got to be emotional about? What's been hard in your life? And she didn't really have an answer, but she just kind of grabbed her. And again, however you choose to express yourself, that's your business. I just was trying to understand it because I didn't understand the whole thing. I didn't know, are you trying to be a vampire or what it is? And please, I'm not picking on anybody's choice. I was trying to understand as a parent. I was raised from a certain background, and it's like if you live in Texas and everybody around you is cowboys, and you come out, well, you hate cowboys, you hate horses, you hate cows, you hate all that stuff, and it don't match, and you don't understand it. And the thing is that when you question it, because if that is the society, but it's like if you imagine, I love it when people move to Arkansas that's lived up north, that's lived anywhere. And you move to Arkansas and you try to explain Arkansas society. Erica, you know what I'm saying. It's kind of hard to, and you see somebody, they're like suffering. I remember when Zeke first moved here, and he was like, the summer, he hated the summer. And then when the winter hit, oh my gosh, he hated the winter terribly. If y'all remember that, he had the hardest time with that. And how do you explain? Well, this is what we're used to. I've always told everybody that if you don't like the weather in Arkansas, just hang around. It's going to change. And so trying to figure out my daughter and trying to figure out a way to relate to her. And I was talking to Max, and he was telling me the story about being adopted, and then when he chose to go off down his own road. Well, the problem is that he was adopted by a preacher. And as a preacher, we tend to, or we should, have to function at a different level. Our concerns are not, they say that the worst thing to be is a preacher's kid. And that's one of the things that I never tried to put my daughter under that microscope of being a preacher's kid. You know, because of being a preacher's kid, one of the first things is you got to understand what is the pressure of a preacher's kid. To understand the pressures of a preacher's kid, you have to understand the pressures of the pastor. Okay? A lot of the modern pastors are employees, Lance. That's what they are. They're employed by a group of people. They did studies of AJ church leadership and trying to figure out what's wrong with church leadership. Because when you start getting into deacons and deacons boards and these people, and the turmoil is so far from, they say that a deacon's board member, there have been more fights and more cussing out of deacon boards than there is at a business. And one of the reasons why that they was trying to figure all these things out, what they found out is that the people who are involved in church leadership have had no real leadership training. They also found out that the people who were in church leadership or who tried to gravitate to church leadership were people who had no real authority at their job. They were middle to lower level management. And if you've ever been in management, you understand the tiers of management. And what happens is that middle to lower level managers, it's a title. That's all that it is. That means that you have to carry the brunt of everything, but you have no real authority. You can't make any changes. You just got the title. You just got that burden placed upon you, but you have no authority. These people became frustrated, and what happened is that they seen the church as a place that they can be an authority now. They can start dictating policies. And so the board would always go in and they would undermine anybody and I remember as a young preacher, and you heard it all of my life, it talked about how, boy, the preachers have stepped on the deacon's toes today. His days are numbered. That was a common theme. That was a common theme, that if the deacons, the elders did not like the preacher's days were numbered. I remember back before I had actually really became involved really in leadership, I had surrendered to preach, and I remember going out there and going and preaching at different churches, and you could tell who was in charge and who was running the show. And as long as they were running the show, the church was never going to succeed. Because you have to understand, how is the structure of authority. The structure of authority is God first. God first. God's word, God's law, everything about God is first. Then who is next in line in authority of the church? The pastor. The pastor is next in line. Who is supporting the pastor? The elders, the leadership, the deacons. They are supporting the pastor. Whenever the pastor reports to the leadership is involved. The leadership is the controller of the church. So what happens is that when you have a preacher who has a group of elders looking down on him, and all of a sudden his kid does something wrong, it's instantly, they look at the preacher, oh, you can't control your kids. So the pressures that was put on the young girls and boys that were the preacher's kids, drove them off to extremes because they just couldn't handle it. And the preachers would be really, really, really hard on the kids because they knew that if they didn't get their family in line, what would happen is they would lose their job. And then they'd have to go out and get a real job. I have had the distinct pleasure of being around several ministers who lost their jobs. And if you've ever had the opportunity to be around a preacher or a minister that has lost their job and had to go get a real job, I mean, I knew a guy that would like cry and complain every day about having to go to work. And I asked him one time, I said, did you ever think that maybe God done that to you? So you can understand what we have to go through, what we feel like, because you've done nothing all during the week. You sit here and you studied the Bible and you built song ministries, and then when you had to go to church, you're all rested. You didn't have nothing else to do. The most stressful thing that this guy had to do was mow the lawn. That was it. Rest of the time he played music. Lance, how would you like that job? And he made over $100,000 a year doing it. Hook me up. But the problem is that one day he lost that job. And see, that was the reason why I never really wanted to get honestly into the ministry. I never really wanted to be at a big church. I never wanted to go, and because I knew, AJ, that I didn't want to tie my family up in that. I didn't want my daughter having to, I knew that she, because of her nature, was going to have that tendency. Number one, the Bible talks about that our sins. Mama used to tell me, boy, you're going to pay for your raising. One day, you're going to pay that debt back. And I always was like, oh my gosh, man, I've got some bills that I'm going to have to pay. If I want to pay for my raising with my kids, because Mama and Daddy both told me, they said, one day, you're going to have kids. And all the things that you wish you had have done, that, and you'll sit there and you'll revisit all these things. I never wanted that. I never wanted to have that pressure. And then I decided that, hey, it's time to do some changing. And when I started looking at my life and start thinking, well, these things that I'm doing now, I'm going to pay for them. I'm going to have to pay for them. So it helped me when I looked at my daughter and my daughter done things or people done things, I would always feel this presence asking me. It's like one time I've told you the story. Bailey made me mad and I wanted to ground her. And I think she was like 12 or 14, and I decided I'm going to ground her till she's 18 years old. And I was thoroughly justified in me grounding her till she was 18 years old. And then God says, how long do you want me to ground you? Well, what do you mean? Well, how many stupid things do you do? And he says, how long do you want to keep punishing you for your wrongs? See, it's easy when we look at somebody else's wrongs and we can attack them and we can polarize them, but yet, what is the difference between this person who's living their wrong and you're living your wrong? There is no difference. The thing is that what is wrong with society now? They say it's tolerance. But there was a clue that was written out in Matthew 24. I'm going to jump ahead and read the scripture to you. I'm going to get your first impression on it. And then I'm going to ask you, do you really think that that's what was said? All right. So in Matthew 24, he was talking about, and I'm going to get there, people and how is Matthew 24, if you want to get there yourself, is Matthew 24, verse 11. And he says, and many false prophets shall arise and shall deceive many. And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. Because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. I had, in other words, it says, the love of many shall grow cold, wax cold. What is your first impression? Now, this is the end days. This is where they had asked Jesus, okay, what is the signs? So, I tried to draw out a chart this morning of things that Jesus said would happen in a particular order. So basically, if you start in Matthew 24, they said, hey, what are the signs? Jesus said, okay. And he gave them a list. Do I think that there is a particular order within the list? I would think so, because he said them in a particular order. So I tend to look for patterns. So I was telling Dar about having to build these things. And I knew that once I built one of them, I could build another one. But before I could build the one, has anybody ever cut crown molding? Do y'all know what crown molding is? Mm-hmm. And if crown molding is cut wrong, Dar, what does it look like?
Terrible.
Terrible. How hard is it to cut crown? It's really not that hard.
No.
The problem with crown molding is that if you cut it at a true 90, then it's going to fit perfectly. But the problem is that how many houses are at a true 90? Do y'all understand what I'm talking about? Houses are not built at a true 90. They are built all kinds of funky angles, and you've got all kinds of things. And so when you put crown molding up there, Carrie, I remember back when we was painting a house, the worst thing that happened to me was I had figured out that Carrie had a particular gift and a talent and a love for painting, and I was like, oh my God, she's going to walk in, she's going to see every gap, every hole. So before Carrie could walk here, I always had to make sure, Dar, that I caulked everything. Well, the problem is that when you cut crown molding, you have to cut it backwards and upside down. And if you don't cut crown molding every day, you got to figure this thing out. And so what I did, and I've learned from history, that if I will take two pieces of old crown molding and I'll start cutting them until I can get the angle, and then I save it. And I put an L on one and R on the other. And that way I know which way I'm going to turn. And so every time I'm cutting a piece of crown molding on this side, I can grab, okay, and I know what I would do. I'd walk out there, I'd put them up, okay, yeah, if it's good, or yeah, I'll make my adjustments. And once I've kind of established that pattern, then I would go over there and I would cut a $50 piece of crown molding. Because the crown molding that I was putting on was $50-something a 10-foot stick. Yeah, so you don't make too many mistakes on that one, because if you cut it too short, guess what, Erica? Now you got a $50 piece, and so that one thing that was $50 is now $100, because now you done wasted one. And you've got these gaps in everything. So when you create a pattern, it helps you to understand how this thing fits up. And so it helps you to alleviate mistakes. So anything I do, I create a pattern, or I try to discover a pattern. Jesus said, first thing is, do not let anyone deceive you. So I'm not smart, but if the first thing Jesus said was, do not be deceived, that would tell me that the first clue is going to be in the deceiving. The second thing he said was there was going to be wars and rumors of wars. Then he said nations shall arise against each other. Now, I thought about that one, because there was wars and rumors of wars, and then it says nations shall rise up against each other. What that means is nations is people. that groups of people shall rise up. There shall be disturbances, AJ, between groups of people. You can relate that right now. Think about the groups of people right now who are in confrontation with each other. What is being constantly perpetuated right now on social media? What's being? Huh? World War III. But nations against nations. In other words, people against people. They're polarizing people and their opinions. Then after that, he says there will be famines.